And greetings, everybody. This is Scott Grossberg from the Proper Tarot School of Divination. Nice to see so many friendly, familiar faces and members. I'm going to do a quick personal shout out. Shad, welcome home. All of you are muted right now, but you can unmute, do a few housekeeping things for the moment. If you need them, restrooms are down the hall to the left. If you need to take a break or you don't want us to see something, just turn your picture off. You can still hear this. If for some reason there's noise, I will mute everybody as needed, with the exception of Bev, our guest professor today. You'll be able to ask questions, lots of them, as we go through this. We'll be together for about 45 minutes to an hour today. This is being recorded. And so there will be I'm going to edit it, and there'll be a replay a little bit later on. And I do want to thank all of you for being here. Also, if you have not done so already, check your email in your inbox, and you will see an email handout from our guest professor today, who I'll introduce you to in a moment. If you don't see it in your inbox, then do me a favor, check your spam folder or your junk mail folder, because it's there. I've seen it. And I'm going to be introducing our guest speaker, listening along with you and learning, moderating at the end. And if you have questions that you don't want to say vocally, you can certainly put them in the chat room and I will relay them to Bev. I also suggest, by the way, that for those of you new to Zoom, go into your settings, into the view, and actually the meeting button at the top of your screen, and put it on speaker view. That will take you out of the Brady Bunch, look that we've got right now, and let you actually see everybody one-on-one. When the recording is done, it will just be the speaker view, and you'll see Bev and me as Bev does her thing. All right, with that, let me go ahead and introduce Bev to you. Beverly Frable, our guest professor today, is a professional consultant. She works with all forms of divination, and you'll be amazed, by the way, as you dig deeper with her. I'm always amazed listening to her. She combines a variety of tools to gain deeper insights during her sessions. And, I've always loved the quote that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and Beverly was very kind enough to forward the well-known and what she calls diverse luminaries that she credits for her unique reading style that you're going to hear about today. Among them, Camelia Elias, Rachel Pollack, Mary Greer, my friend Enrique Enriquez, and Ronna George, Carrie Paris, and she's actually included me on that list, so I'm humbled. Thank you, Bev. If you need to reach or want to reach, must reach Bev, she can be reached at beverly.tarotconnections@gmail.com. And with that, Bev, welcome. And I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm excited, and I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to do a screen share of a presentation I put together about this topic, and it's one of the classes I offer. So in the time we have, we'll be doing, frankly, an abbreviated version, but it'll cover all the big points, and the handouts capture them as well. So let me kick that off. Okay, here we go. All right, I trust you can see this. Okay. New vision, new readings. I wanted to give you a little bit of background of how this came to me to be a topic of consideration first. And I tend basically started because I question the origin of things. I like to remove the biases and the perceptions of individuals and actually go back to the source. I've done that all my life because I like to filter out all the things that may have impacted the meanings of them or the descriptions of them over time. So I've been doing that, questioning the belief. It had me go back to Tarot Marseille, which was one of the first tarot decks originally. That's how I started. And then I've attended a lot of presentations, and people said things along the way that really struck me. One of them was Rana George describing how the cards that were presented to her um, were interpreted by her in a totally different way than they would have been by somebody that she values readings by, and vice versa. She said that somebody she valued the reading of Lenormand saw the cards and totally came to a different conclusion about the meaning of those. And that was the first time aha moment for me when I realized that the cards themselves, the descriptions that are associated with them, isn't what she's reading. She's basically reading the meanings that she has for those particular cards. And that was built on by a presentation I saw with Benabel Wen, who is an amazing presenter. And she described how she believes that the guides that are giving you the cards, choosing the cards, that are filtering the information to you, if you believe that is such a thing, really know you, really know the individual they're talking to. They're your guides, they're your people, they are talking to you. So they're presenting you with something that would have meaning to you, which may not be the same way that guides for another person would be presenting it to them, which clicked in a way with what Rana was saying. So I built on that, believing that the whatever you call it, the energy, the power, the guides, the spirit that communicate with me when I'm doing readings, and vice versa, obviously with you, would be filtering information to you in a way that they believe you would understand it. And it's that communication chain you have with your energies that you need to build on and strengthen and come to some understanding about, because what other people will be getting from their particular energies will be something different to relay that same message. So all of that kind of took me back to the fact that when I'm seeing the cards, I have to build on the communication chain I have with whatever I'm getting, whoever I'm communicating with, whatever energies, whatever you call it. And that's the communication chain I have to work on. That's the one I have to strengthen, and not necessarily focus on what the cards are telling me, but only what the download is trying to tell me, that what those cards are transferring to me as far as the message goes. So this class kind of evolved from that point of view. And you can actually look at, and we're not going to go through this, but I believe it's in your handout, the the chain of the chain tarot followed in when it began in like 1450, wider in a wider case it was 1600s. And from that point to where we are today, there were a lot of hands in the mix. There were a lot of people that touched it. There were a lot of people that gave their interpretations of what these things meant. And all of those were from people who, whether they acknowledge it or not, would have had their own biases based on their culture, their beliefs, etc. So again, I wanted to take all that out of the mix when I'm doing my reading. I try to not have that sway me in total. I like to give consideration to the communication chain I've described of what's coming to me and what that might mean from the energies that I'm getting. So what we're going to be doing today is trying to focus most on what we can do to enhance the readings that we're getting, regardless of what choice and divination tool you use, to appear at your unconscious level, those things that are happening maybe behind the scenes in your own mind, influences you're getting that you may not even realize you're processing in your own mind, and how that may be influencing your reading, or how it should be influencing your reading. And I don't like the word should, how it could influence your reading in a way that would enhance the messages that you're getting. So we're going to go beyond the layers of the previous learning, as it says, and we're going to try to avoid relying totally on the descriptions that were written by people, the people that were influenced by all those cultural and personal beliefs. And we're going to actually focus on using our right brain, which is those that are more creative, the creative right brain, which is most creative, and not so much the learned things we have from our left brain. We're going to look at symbols in the cards and the functions of those symbols and really go back to basics about that. We're going to do comparisons between the cards that we're seeing, and we're going to see what similarities and differences they have and how that might be interpreted into a message or a definition in a reading. And we're going to try to distinguish what our guides, our energies might be trying to tell us through the cards that they're presenting to us by whatever chance or choice that's made in putting those cards there in the first place. And one of the things that really struck me is the Rosetta Stone when I start doing some research in this. And I didn't know anything about the Rosetta Stone. Frankly, whenever I heard it in school, I just totally learned whatever I needed to pass the test. But actually, what fascinated me about this now in my life was the importance of it, because that was actually the key to the hieroglyphics and all those cave things that were later interpreted to have meaning. And the Rosetta Stone is what broke the code. And if you have an interest in understanding how important signs and symbols can be and what those cave and hieroglyphics might have referenced, the Rosetta Stone was the tool that actually broke the code for other people to interpret signs and symbols of what was meant through that. So I thought that was an interesting example of how signs and symbols can have such meaning. And we're going to look at how we can look at signs and symbols and arrive at same meaning in our lives. We're going to look at shapes, patterns, and all those things that are noted here. So the first thing we're going to look at is pattern reading. If we give consideration to the fact that there's no typical meaning in the card, you're going to look at, when you're reading with this methodology, it's just a layer you can choose to use by looking at the cards in front of you and determining what pattern there might be. And we're going to see examples of that later. You can give, you can look at what similarities these cards have to each other and arrive at a quick kind of almost shotgun approach to what you're seeing in total between all of these cards and what stands out at you. And frankly, that'll be different for every reading you give. You might actually look at the same cards in a different situation, and that same thing that's standing out to you right now is not the same thing that stands out to you later. So that's what you are going to arrive at. Let yourself flow with it. Let yourself see what's there without processing, if possible. We're going to look at things like, do suits repeats? Like these are some things that you may already pay attention to when you're doing readings. Do you see an overabundance of swords or cups if you're doing tarot? Or if you're doing Lenormand, do you see an overabundance of like characters, or do you see an overabundance of trees or animals, and what that might mean and what you're actually reading, or what colors stand out? Colors are an important thing, and we'll touch on that later, because colors actually influence you in a way that you probably aren't processing. And that's actually used in marketing pretty heavily. If for those of you who are involved in that career, you probably know how colors can be used for marketing the products that you're dealing with. It's having an impact on you without you giving any realization to that. So give some thought to that. I mean, if the colors are influencing you in some way, how are you being influenced? Are those things that you think you should be noticing about the particular reading you're doing? What numbers are showing up? For instance, are mostly odd numbers in front of you, or mostly even? Are there transitions between one to sequential transitions, but one is missing? And which one is missing and what that might mean? Are the characters looking in one direction or another? We'll be talking about characters soon too. And characters, are they looking at a direction, but there's another looking it toward it and it's being blocked? We'll see examples of that as well. I want to give opportunities here for, I guess, Scott is actually monitoring chatting. If you have questions along the way, or you want clarification about any of this, feel free to jot a line and chat, and I'll try to elaborate on it. I know I'm moving relatively quickly, because this class typically takes closer to an hour and a half, because we look at examples along the way. But again, because of the time allowances, we're kind of rushing through it a bit.
Okay. Eva has said fantastic, Beverly, what you're doing.
Oh, well, that's a given, Eva. No, I'm kidding.
By the way, in addition to using the chat room, if you guys want to use reactions in Zoom, you can also raise your hand and we'll notice it that way as well.
Okay. I'm not sure I'll be so good at noticing that, Scott, so I'll count on you to interrupt.
That's fine. I'll moderate it. I got your back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go back to here. Now here's an example. Two cards that might show up. Okay, I don't know about you. And this is where everybody is really different as well. I mean, so what I might suggest to you, I notice is not what you might notice. And what you might notice is what you should, again, I hate the word should, what would be meaningful to you. So you have to decide what works well for you. And because, as I mentioned, the guides, the energies, whatever you believe is coming to you is directing you in some way. Mine is directing me in a different way. I see a lot of yellow here. I see a lot of like uh, circles, like the aha kind of circle thing going on. I see temperance really filling this card like big time. And then I see her kind of half in position here. I see those things right away. um, the foot in the water, there's foot in the water. In both cases, the water is emphasized here, but only with half the body attached to it. What all that might mean. You know what? The question that is being posed for the reading that you're doing will, of course, influence you as well. So that's also something like we can't really do an accurate reading of what this interprets into. What I'm trying to do here is to point out the things that you might notice that you may not have noticed before. And you're going to have to decide what that means, and what that means to the question you have, what that means to the other cards that you have in front of you. These are, again, just examples of these two cards and how they might relate to each other. Another interesting thing is we have this path in temperance, which is leading to like this burst of sun or a burst of light. And then in the other case, we have a mountain, which is kind of attached to a star. I mean, the star is almost touching the mountain, but not quite. And there's a lot of green before it. What might that mean? I mean, so here outside of the meanings of the cards that we're looking at, we also want to give some thought to what is in the background or that we may not notice. And the fact that it's kind of in the background or the fact that it's to the left could be meaningful. There's so much you can see here. Not all of it will be things that will probably capture you. Not all of it will be things that might have meaning for you. Again, we're just focusing on the things you may not have considered before and how that can influence your readings. Okay. Going on to the next. Here are a whole bunch of examples of expressions. Now, Terra Marseille is notorious for expressions, and the differences between decks are significant. And the expressions you see as a result of that are also significant. You have Rider Waite, though, on the left side of the screen, toward the top. And actually, Lenormand is toward the bottom, and that particular one is Rana George's Lenormand. At the end of this, I do name all the decks that you're seeing here, so you can see references to what decks these are if that's of interest to you. Now, just looking at the expressions, I mean, these are things some people do pay attention to, not always. And again, sometimes you want to, and sometimes you might feel it doesn't feel like it's drawing you in, and that's fine too. But it's mentioned here because they were in the Tarot Marseille, especially. They do add a lot of significance at times to the readings, and it's something that a lot of people don't give consideration to. That I wanted to point out specifically. You might want to. Thoth is also shown here. Now, Thoth expressions are a little bit harder to read, for me anyway, because they're smaller, not as noticeable to me. And there's just so much activity going on in the Thoth deck that it's not something I tend to focus on. But if you decide to do it, it can also change and alter some of the meaning that you're getting from the reading. Okay. Next. Now here you see characters and some of the transitions between how those characters are positioned and what they look like between the cards that may appear in a reading. It's somewhat fascinating to look at, for instance, the three that are Rider Waite Smith toward the bottom there. The Lovers, the Hierophant, and the Devil. Now, a lot of you already give thought to, I'm sure, the fact that there are two characters with one in the middle that's huge, that's larger. But if these three cards would show up, you might want to not only think about individually what those characters might mean, but also how they're transferred, or what how they transcend from one card to another. You have the naked two characters in the front there. You have then the back of them, and they're both bald in the second one, and then you have them naked in the third one as well. But they're a little bit smaller in the third one, and the characters in the middle obviously are very different. And what uh, what transitions occur with that is also meaningful. Um, you see the three on the top there for the Tarot Marseille. The angel in the top hitting the one in the middle, and then again there's two with the backs facing us. And in Thoth, there's also that similar pattern where there's two with one in the middle and how they transition. Now, again, I want to mention that the decks you're using, for instance, especially with the Tarot Marseille, are going to change what you're seeing dramatically. So the decks you're using will relay different messages depending on what the decks are, obviously, and may not capture you in the same way. So this is all very fluid. Let me go on to the next one. Here is something that, frankly, I don't know that a lot of people give consideration to. If you look at the top, the bottom there, you have the Pope, where the guy's standing with their backs to us, and look at the head. The head, it's kind of like a donut kind of thing going on. And then you look at Judgment, and that same donut kind of thing is going on in the Judgment card. Now, is that meant to imply perhaps that one of those is transitioned to that Judgment card? Is it the same character, or is it different? Those are things you might want to point out and ask yourself about that. It's just more examples of the same character transitions that we've talked about in these cards here, and the actions that they have. Now you can see the similarity in the Hanging Man and the Tower. We have one hanging and attached to actually a frame, and then one free falling, and they're both wearing blue. So is it meant to imply that it might be the same character free falling, and now he loosened himself up, but now he's in kind of a free fall and falling out of the security that he did have? The actions are significant in that one as well. I thought this was interesting. If you look at the queens and you look at the kings in the Tarot Marseille, you can see some differences between what they're looking at, the positions they have, and frankly, for instance, if you look at the King of Pentacles, he's facing one direction and he's looking in another. Is that significant in some way? So picking out on things like that, picking up on things like that, the position of their feet, the hats even that they have. In the King of Pentacles there, you can see it's almost kind of like an infinity sign. Is that meaningful in some way? What items are they gripping? How hard are they gripping it? What positions are their hands? Characters provide a lot of information that you may or may not have processed, but probably have been influenced by without even giving consideration to it. And that's the kind of stuff that you want to bring out toward the front. Numbers, if those of you in numerology know a lot about how significant numbers can be. In tarot, they also could have some significance here. I have some examples of what the numbers look like on the right side of the screen. But on the left side of the screen, the tarot process and the 1 through 10 scenarios pretty much follow this in the scenic versions of what was drawn. So if you see that one of the numbers is missing, like we mentioned earlier, does that mean that that particular position or that particular association is missing from the reading that you're giving? If there are no 4s, but there are every other number is showing up in some way or in a sequence except for that one, does that mean that they're lacking stability or foundation? You might want to give some consideration to what the number means and why it might be lacking. And you can also notice that if the cards are going from one to, if they're following a position of starting with an ace and ending with a 10, then, and there's not many numbers in between. In other words, if you're only doing a 3-card reading and you have an ace and you have a 2 and then you have a 10, that's a pretty quick leap from a 2 to a 10. So they're missing a lot in the middle. That could mean that things are going to be moving relatively fast, and vice versa. If you have the 10 and then you have a 1, you could be saying that you're going to actually reach you're going to slow down dramatically because you're going from a 10 to a 1. So that's slow. And also it's a big leap down in some ways. It's going back to the beginning. Okay. Give some thought to 2 is more than 1, but less than 6. Yeah, the leaps you're taking could imply some speeds that you're taking. And if whether one repeats or not, one might be more significant than other. If you're getting a lot of 7s, I had some readings where every 7 showed up, and the only other number that was there was an ace. So I thought that was pretty telling. It could mean that there's a lot of challenges coming up, and they're going to have to go back to the beginning because none of the other numbers ended up showing up. Shapes and patterns, these are one of my favorite things. If you give some thought to what shapes are consistent between these cards. The tower and the moon is not necessarily something I'd give notice to. The fact that there's like a round yellow thing in the tower and there's a bigger, fuller yellow thing in the moon. What might that mean to you? Or in Judgment, you have the angel transitioning into the moon. You have a face on the moon, so you could actually give some thought to the fact that it's actually representative of the angel, and that a transition in some way to the moon, and what that could be telling you.
Yeah, I'm going to throw one thing in here, Bev, just as an extension of a conversation you and I had offline.
Okay, cool.
For those of you who know Hebrew, in the Rider-Waite deck, those look like yods, Y-O-D, to me, which is the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet and generally represents sparks of divine energy. So, I mean, that's what jumps out at me when I look at those.
I love that. I love that. Sparks of divine energy. And, I love that with the yellow droplets or whatever that are between both of them. They have those in common as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's interesting. Thank you, Scott. I want to also throw out something about the moon, and I always mention this because I'm always blown away by it. That crawfish or lobster or whatever it is that's in most moon cards, when I studied the significance of that at one point, I realized that with growth, they shed their shell, and to shed their shell, they have to move backwards out of their shell before they can form a new shell. So I thought that was really interesting when you give thought to the crawfish there. In order to grow, it had to let go of the shell. It had to go backwards to let go of the shell before it could actually grow a new one. And I thought that was really insightful in some ways regarding the moon card and how that might change the meaning of that card in some way for me. So I thought I'd mention that. Okay. Oops. Back. Here's another example of shapes, patterns, and forms. Again, you have and this might mean the same to you as far as what you just mentioned, Scott, the kind of glow around the head and the hangman and temperance, or the glow around the hangman, and then that at the end of the path, that glow around the end of the path. Might that be a tie in some way?
Yeah, I want to interrupt
Yes.
here real quick just to pass on a comment from Hava. The numbered transitions are really interesting, Bev. I never thought about the numbers that way. Slowing down, speeding up, or moving backwards or forwards, very cool. And then Rowan said, I like the nod to the hermit in the Thoth deck with the 9 rods in the sky, and Isis with the 2 Anubis.
Yeah, Thoth is a really deep deck. There's so much to see. I mean, you could spend so much time on just one card with them. And I love it. I love the depth of it, but I'm not always in the mood for that kind of depth. It takes some work.
It does take work.
Yeah. Now, here's a good example of the Thoth deck on the right side of the screen. I mean, you see the square in the science card there, and you see it again in the power card, but it's tilted, of course, in the science card. And there's so many lines. I mean, I just get the sense of the 6 of Swords in the science card and how complicated and convoluted it really is, and how much work it really takes to get through all of those things. It's really one of the most beautiful cards, I think, in the deck, but it also really creates this emotion when I look at it. Um, and it's actually very powerful for that reason for me. And the power card and how that might relate to it, if you're getting those together, you can see some resemblance between the two. Okay. Now here's some shapes. Again, people are sometimes turned off by Tarot Marseille because they don't have the scenes that Rider Waite does. But if you work with it, you end up finding that there are the diagrams that they offer do tell a story, and the story can change depending on the reading and what the questions might be. Now, in this case, I wanted to show that on the lower left screen, you actually see two groups you can see. You can see different things at different times, but I want to point out one thing that kind of hit me right away when I saw it is two groups of three. You have like a team of three at top, team of three at bottom, and there's like one head. There's one center one where the growth is around it, and that's kind of the protected one, if you will, or perhaps the powerful one over the other two. Um, and here, this is an actual reading that I had when I was talking to somebody about a promotion. They wanted to know if they would get the promotion that they were looking for. And what I saw was there were two teams that told me. There were two, well, after I gave the reading, they told me, it's so interesting because there are two teams of people. Okay, so you can kind of see that. There are two teams of people right now, and they're going to be choosing someone from that team to oversee it. And so the middle card, before they told all that, I said, it looks like you're going to get it, and you're going to get it over, and there's going to be a decrease of one person on the team, and you're going to be you're going to be in charge of this one joined team now. And you can see the progression in these three cards where that kind of happens. Um, you see the six of swords in the middle there where there's some decision being made, and there's going to be a growth opportunity. You can see that growth opportunity in the middle of those swords, and then you can see that person having the head of the team now with two people above, two people below, and that person's in that team now with that growth around it, overseeing that. It's actually very clear after we ended up talking about what I was seeing and the fact they get it, and they describe the situation they have and how it could evolve. It ended up,
Let me point out one thing, Bev,
sure,
to those of
yeah,
you who are not used to using the Tarot de Marseille and might want to use that. Something that I have personally found
yeah,
is if you give yourself some distance, and I mean physical proximity, you'll notice that in Bev's slides here, it's really apparent what she's talking about, almost like a Rorschach ink blot test, as
ah,
far as movement and things like that. Many of us, me included, when we read, sometimes we kind of move in on the deck as we're reading it and we're looking at the cards up close. I really urge you to take a breath and back up and get some space to your reading it, and some of this stuff will jump out like never before.
that's perfect. And it's almost like what we're going to say next, because I think we'll see an example of kind of the same thing you just said. That's perfect, and you're absolutely right. If you stop overthinking. Somebody asked me, how do I read Tarot Marseille? I said, read like you're a 6-year-old. I think that can be really kind of easy to look at it as a shape and a form, and not overthink it. If you overthink it, that's when you could get in trouble. On top of what we just talked about, these are pentagrams. I'm sorry, pentacles. So that's coins. That's equivalent of like the material thing in life. So that was even more telling when she was talking about the promotion. It's about work. It's about gaining material advantage. It's about that kind of thing. So all of that came together. I won't go on the next one in the interest of time, but there's a lot more we could talk about. And here, this is Scott, an example of kind of like what you were saying. I have another class called Nomadic Divination, which is about going back to the basics and actually reading like you're a nomad. And one of the slides in that presentation encourages people to do something called like the soft focus, sharp focus on a reading on the cards before you actually even look at them. I have them in the Dramatic Divination class. We have them face down, all these cards. And then we have them turning over, but not looking at them as you do it. I mean, really looking away from it as you do it. And then kind of glazing, like a soft glaze, like you're doing a 3D read, you know, those 3D print things. And you're kind of like pulling away and you're almost squinting your eyes so you can barely see it. And looking at the cards you turned over in with that kind of vision and seeing what stands out. Now, here's an example of kind of what it looks like when you do that, and actually looking at the cards and thinking about them, thinking, glancing at them in a way to see what stands out before you sharp focus in on them. And it can be somewhat telling to see how they blend together and what stands out. And that's another way you can actually look at shapes, patterns, and forms that can be kind of meaningful to notice things you wouldn't have noticed otherwise. In this example, I mean, the blue obviously shows up. Um, the blue shows up with kind of the black frame and the gray. So that can tell you different things. It can tell you that, and you might actually think that there's kind of like the shape in the middle looking at the blue, what that might all mean. And you don't really notice necessarily it's the hermit at first, but the blue definitely shines through in some way. So that, what does that prompt you to think about? And again, we'll be talking about colors later, but that's can be a lot of fun to do. The people that take the nomadic divination class said that they actually they actually had reading, the depths of their readings increased because they actually focused on the blend of the cards together instead of individually, and they found that really helped when they were trying to put them all together and interpret them together. Okay. Colors. Colors are spontaneous and behind the scenes things that go on in your mind before you realize it. And these are interesting facts. There's a lot of studying going on about how minds process information right now and how that influences what we think and our behaviors. Before we even have control over them, there's things being decided for us by our own mind. Our 90% of our snap judgments are influenced by the psychological stuff that go on regarding colors alone. So if you are more aware of that for yourself, you can really improve the readings that you have because a lot of things are coming to you before you even give thought to it. And those are the things you really want to access and have more awareness of. And that's a good word to have, an awareness of it, so that you can more easily interpret that into what it might mean to you. Now, here's an example. Somebody put this chart together, and unfortunately, I don't know, I don't have record of who it was. I looked online to try to track it down, and I couldn't. But in tarot, these colors, you can do some research about colors in tarot, and you'll find pretty much this is what most people agree on. It's a great summary of that. And I don't remember if it's in the handout or not. I think it is. I'm hoping it is. But you can do a lot of research online and you'll find that there's a lot of examples out there of people who say the same type of thing. This is what's implied by the colors that are used. And a lot of times these are things that influence us before we even give thought to it. You'll notice here, for instance, the white off-white thing in Rider Waite. It's said to represent spirituality. Well, look how they used it here. Look how Pamela Coleman Smith used it when she was coming up with these scenes. You kind of get the sense of the purity and all these beautiful things. I mean, you kind of get that emotion by just looking at these cards. So you are influenced by it, and without perhaps giving thought to that. Black. Well, it's pretty obvious how black makes us feel, but definitely Pamela Coleman Smith used it in a certain way when she was doing her scenic things here. It's heavily represented in the cards that tend to show us that. Yellow, a lot of yellow. Structure, order. Well, she uses that too, and it's kind of fun to actually lay the cards in front of you and think of yellow and look how it's used by the cards that she's used it in. Red, spiritual growth, passion, energy, activity. It's interesting that was used in the Eight of Swords. You don't necessarily see a lot of spiritual growth, passion, or energy there. I mean, she's really held and she's really held there, but it's also representative of blood and suffering. So it's used in a lot of different ways. I mean, kind of polar opposites here, but you do kind of get that emotion when you're looking at these cards of that stream of meaning that they associate it with. Blue and light blue, subconscious and unconscious levels. I thought that was really interesting when I looked at the high priestess and how prominent it was in that, the light blue. Light blue continued. It's also used, it's used a lot in the scenes for Terra Marseille and Rider Waite for the non-human things. So when you think about it as spiritual, that can be very enlightening to think about how the non-human entities represented in cards might have some spiritual sides to them that you're giving consideration to. Green, struggle in life. That's fascinating when you look at the cards that she chose to use it for here. The Page of Pentacles, perhaps struggling to find their way. I mean, it's wondering, I have to wonder how she chose to use it for that particular one. But depending on how you interpret the Page of Pentacles, I can see how it might have been meant to be that. Caucasian flesh. It was pointed out, I initially had here flesh, and someone was kind enough to tell me it's Caucasian flesh. You're right. I mean, here I am, a white person. There's where I'm being influenced by not even giving consideration to other fleshes out there. Shame on me, and I'm glad when it's pointed out. But Caucasian flesh, in this particular case, is meant shades of humanity. I think you see more and more decks now that are expanding that to represent and be more inclusive, thankfully. Okay, now here we have some exercises we don't have time for. In the other class, we spent some time comparing between the cards and what they show. I will point out here is because it's interesting to me, this is Rana George's Lenormand deck. The top corner there, the path and the crossroads, and also the one in the book. The book is being held by this book stand that really mirrors in a lot of ways the crossroads. So it's kind of interesting to think about what that book is representative of. The fact that the information in it may lead us to some decision we need to make. It's when you look at it that way and notice the thing it's holding it as instead of just the book, it kind of leads you to a deeper meaning for that card.
And I'll point out real
Yeah.
quick, Bev,
Yeah.
if you take a look at that book, it's also the Latin numeral 10 for that card.
It is?
It is.
Oh, very cool. See that? Yeah. I'm still noticing new things. Yeah, absolutely. Very good. More examples of what you see here. More examples. I'll leave it with this. These are quotes that I came across over time, and it's included in your handout. Just supports for me the fact that we want to give some more thought in my mind to what we're seeing, the symbols of what we're seeing, the signs and what we're seeing, more than the keywords that's normally associated with that. These are people that are very oriented in that way, and it's really helpful for me to give some thought to how they viewed the world and how that can be utilized by me when I'm looking at not just cards, but almost anything in the world. And this was written by, this is from a book by a guy named Patrick Mal. I'm not sure I'm saying his name right. He's a professor and he taught a course on divination. And I read his book, and he's not a reader, but his whole family are readers. And his son actually has his own deck out there. But he decided to look into tarot and see what's this tarot thing about in divination and how does it really work. And in the intro to his book, somebody asked him after he's written all this stuff, what do you believe? Do you believe there's really anything to this or not? And this was his answer to that. I won't read it here. It's included in your handout, but he captured in his answer a lot of the things that that I believe that he just word it in such a way that it really represented a lot of the thoughts I have, and a lot of the thoughts that went into the presentation itself. The decks that are shown are named here. Here's some sources and recommendations of other books that really kind of lead you down the path of coming onto your own conclusions about the cards. And that is the end of my presentation.
Well, first of all, thank you. Absolutely fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
We're gonna let you guys ask questions here in a minute. Because Bev loves to pass on quotes. I'm going to pass on one of my favorite quotes, by the way. And many of you know J.P. Morgan. You know the name. What you don't know is one of the quotes that he's famous for. This is J.P. Morgan, right? One of the wealthiest guys out there, financier, said, "Millionaires don't need astrologers. Billionaires do." And it's actually fascinating when you look into the background of that and how many of the people who you would consider to be successful on a number of levels do and seek and have their own mentors, very much like what Bev was talking about today, and use these tools for them. All right, so let's open it up, Bev, if you don't mind, for any questions that people might have.
Absolutely.
Anybody have any comments? Just turn your mic on. It'd be easier that way. You're stunned into silence. Yeah, Shad.
I did notice. I thought that was really great. I got thrown out for a little bit. I had to reboot my computer, but I thought it was really good. I thought you brought up some really interesting points and some things that I hadn't thought of before. One thing you mentioned, though, I could see Enriquez in when you were talking about the progressive of the numbers, and that's just great. That's some people mentioned that was they hadn't thought about that before, and I hadn't thought about it until I'd heard it from Enrique. Yeah. But it's just a really it's a nice thing to point out, and I think it's a pretty effective thing to think about too. But I just thought you did a really nice job here today, Bev. I thought it was really quite good, and it gave me some things to think about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, he's definitely a big influence on me. He's a wonderful teacher, and he teaches you how to think outside of your own head. And so do so many other people that were named already today. One of the other things that Camellia taught me, which you reminded me of, is how swords and wands are weapons that are, or not weapons, are things that are used to reach a distance. I mean, you can reach further than your arms reach by that. So that typically can imply like it's further away from you, it's more in the future. If you see a lot of wands and swords, and that's not necessarily something that people associate with them. So I wanted to mention that, versus cups and coins, which you hold and they're like within your body range. I mean, because you're holding it in your hand and it doesn't reach further than that. So, I mean, that's sooner, that's closer. It's those are other things that you can interpret cups and coins to mean. So that's another influence, another meaning you can associate with that if you're seeing a lot of them in the reading you're doing.
Yeah, I'll add one thing just to kind of give you guys a tease of another class that's coming that I'll be sharing with you. If you think about the swords, which is what Bev was talking about, I want you to think about this concept. A sword changes whoever holds it. Now, just that word alone, that sentence alone, a sword changes whoever holds it. And when you put that in the context of your readings using any of the decks that you have, whenever you see a dagger, a sword, a knife, etc., you will realize what it's doing to the person who is in proximity with it.
Very cool. Thank you.
All right. Anybody have anything else? You're all stunned into silence. Going once. Going twice. Yes, Hava. Are you just saying bye?
No. I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When you're looking at patterns, are you looking at patterns only in the specific reading that you're doing at that time, or are you remembering patterns as you were studying the deck? For instance, I seem to be stuck on the Death card and the Sun card. And the similarities in those cards are just stuck in my brain. The white horse, the red feather. And so when I get a Death card in a reading, or I get a Sun card in my reading, those other cards are influencing my readings, even though they're not in the actual reading.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Should I be thinking about patterns that way, or just thinking about patterns in the actual reading itself?
Well, you know, my opinion is there are no shoulds. So I think that if they matter to you, it matters to you. And that's where we differ as readers. You know, that's where we have to find our own methodology, our own thought process, and our own way of reading. I don't think there are any absolutes. I think that you might now think of it that way, but at some point you may not think of it that way. And then it doesn't work that way for you anymore. I think we need to listen to all of those downloads, messages, thoughts that we get and decide how that matters to what we're doing right now. Because I think it's all being presented to us for a reason. I believe that.
And Hava, I'm going to go one step further and underscore something I've taught before that you've been part of that training. And, you know, as I was studying a lot of the Greek oracle traditions, a lot of them would write their prophecies, their oracles, their divination, their tellings before they even met somebody.
Wow.
Knowing that it was intended for them. And, you know, they'd write them on leaves, for example, leave them at the mouth of the cave, and someone would walk by, and whoever was meant to find it would find it, or it would blow away, and that would be the end of it. And with that in mind, I kind of encourage everybody to think of your cards, among other type of oracular devices, as things that are bringing out what's already in you. You know, you can read without any of this, right? And to a certain degree, in my opinion, these are props that we're using to help us enunciate and divine and define and clarify what's already in us. You don't need them, which is why there are so many types, you know, different kinds of divination systems out there. They all work. And I've said this before, if you can read tarot cards, you can read light bulbs. And so if those are the symbolic connections that are jumping out at you, understand that they're coming from you, and then go with it.
Okay.
And don't self-censor.
Thank you. Thanks, Bev.
I love you.
It was so awesome.
I love Scott. I love you, Scott.
I love you too, Bev.
You know, can I add one thing to that? I'm currently studying ancient divination processes. And one of the things that I read was somebody, one of the cultures used to read branches in a tree. They used to look up in the tree, and the way the branches were formed was meaningful to them. Have you ever tried? If you haven't tried that, I encourage you to do it, because it's fascinating what you can see in the form of the branches. And to tie on to Scott's, you can read anything, light bulbs included. Begin to do that. I think that's fascinating stuff to do. And don't limit yourself to cards.
I mean, I will tell you, it's interesting that you said that, Bev. I've never even told anybody this before, but might as well now. I think many of you know, I've got a labyrinth in my backyard, and around it are 3 oak trees forming a triad. And one of the things that, among other things, my granddaughter and I, if she goes out and walks it, we always, when we're done, walk by one of the oak trees, and she talks to the tree, and we look at the shape and look at the formation. Now, she doesn't have a clue what she's doing consciously, but to make those connections, you know, I'm looking for those things. And I think you would be amazed, all of you, when you see what's actually available to you everywhere.
That's beautiful.
All right. Anything else from anybody? Yes, David. Need to unmute, buddy. There you go.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Beverly. Do you follow Amelia in the importance of the question? And secondly, do you try and analyze, say, a 3-card reading, or is it what your eye catches first?
Both for me. Both. It's what my eye catches first usually. And then I look deeper at it because I owe it to the person I'm reading for to give thought to it as well, you know, and I really believe that more will show up after I focus more on the cards, and some of the historical meanings play into that, you know, but I'm not tied to that at the same time. And I missed your first thing question? I missed it if so.
No, you have it all.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, and I want to underscore what Bev is saying. There are times, many of you know this, who are in this with us today. There are times when I'll do a reading and the reading has absolutely nothing to do with the cards, by the way. Absolutely nothing. It's here's the feeling, here's the flow, here's what's coming. It's like a waking dream kind of thing. And I don't know about you, Bev, I'll just ask you, when I do a reading, I for the most part, don't remember the reading after I give it. How about you?
Yeah, I tend to feel remember the emotion of it, but not the reading itself. You know, and the response that was given, because I'm always trying to learn how to do it better. So I kind of evaluate the flow of it, but not so much the information on it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else, folks? We have something in the chat from Oliver. Excellent presentation, Bev. I'd recommend a book called The First Signs of Genevieve. I believe I'm pronouncing it right. Von Pettenser. I'm not sure about the spelling. She's a paleoanthropologist studying Ice Age cave art and geometric signs that appear there. Oh, now Oliver, you're talking my language, because actually, a little hint here, one of the big rocks that was that is outside the labyrinth here, the quest as I call it, actually has cave art that I have replicated on it, so that you see that before you enter into the quest. Bev, are you doing anything with this type of graphic imagery?
Yes, actually, that tied to other ancient divination forms. I have to learn how to say that word better, but yeah, I'm doing some bone casting. I'm putting a class
Wonderful.
Together on that, and that's based on what you introduced me to, Scott. And actually, you know, making our own bones. I mean, you've introduced me to that, and skeleton keys and all of those other things. So I'm looking at African divination systems and what the nomads used to do with just what the earth provided them, because they had really very little. So they used what they had to do divining, because they all believed in divining. That's throughout the world. So yeah, I'm doing some of that is cave dwelling information as well. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. With that, I'm going to bring this to an end. Bev, do us a favor. Let everybody know how they can find you both on Facebook and email.
Okay. Thank you. I'm on Facebook. You can Beverly Frable, but I have a page called Tarot Connections. It has the S on it. There's another one without the S, and that's not me, but they're also very nice people. So Tarot Connections. And if you want to reach me, it's beverly.tarotconnections@gmail.com. And I'd be glad to hear from you.
Bev, again, thank you very much personally for agreeing to do this. It's been wonderful. There's a lot here for everybody to unpack. Bev is part of our group in Proper Tarot, so please, you can ask questions there. I'm sure if you have a question, everybody else will as well. And with that, until our next class, thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Scott.